I welcome you. I'm Peter Ray. I'm the Dean and the Vice Principal here at Nazarene Theological College. And of course this event is one that moves around locations, and we're delighted to host NTC and Cliff College this session today. I have to say I'm really looking forward to the papers that are going to be offered. So with that, I'm going to turn over to George to welcome you on behalf of our partnership.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. It's very good to be here as a member of the Cliff College faculty and to work in partnership to host this event with the Wesley Research Centre. It's good to work out where we're going to co-host, and it's good today to be here. It's part of the Nazarene Theological College's anniversary celebrations, and it's good too to be doing that here with a topic that's so important to both of the institutions, the holiness movements in the UK. It's been important for both of us, the history, and I look forward to the papers today. So I hope we have a very good day. Perhaps in the future we'll be welcoming you jointly to Cliff College. We look forward to that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm going to change hats now because it's my privilege of introducing our first paper and our first speaker. You'll have seen that the first paper today is entitled Scholarship on Fire, and I'll stay there with that on safe ground. And the name, of course, is picked up from well, maybe I'm not allowed to tell you that. I'll keep that powder dry. But I will say that it's a topic that Professor Tom Noble is particularly well qualified to speak about, since he's been involved with this subject over many years. Those of you who know him will know that he is Research Professor of Theology at Nazarene Theological Seminary in Kansas City, and he's served there as a professor since 1996, but has essentially travelled over there from time to time and retained a base here, for which we're grateful. Because before that he taught theology for 20 years here at NTC, where he also served as academic dean. He's still a senior research fellow here. He supervises PhD research at the college, and he has published authored a number of books, including a centenary history of the Church of the Nazarene in the UK, Called to be Saints. He is a past president of the Wesleyan Theological Society and presently serves as president of the T.F. Torrance Theological Fellowship. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing what Dr. Noble has to say on this topic, and I will hand over the chair to him.
Thank you very much, Peter. I thought when he said that I had a particular interest in this topic, he was going to say it's because I'm the same age as the college. But I'm not quite. I have a few extra handouts here, if anybody didn't get one. But they're there in the front. They can't go round. When I was asked to do this some months ago, it was then that I realised that the last history of the college was actually published for the 50th anniversary 25 years ago, and there are copies of that in the back, written by Peter's father, Scholarship on Fire. And so it did occur to me that after another 25 years, it was time to have a fresh look at it. And so I started writing, and by the end of the 10th page, I'd only got to 1970, and then I realised I really only have 35 minutes here if we're going to leave time for some discussion. So I've done this handout as a sort of summary of the draft that I've written so far, and I'll skip through parts and hopefully get within 30 minutes. And I'm assuming that the roots of the college are of most interest to this audience, although I will talk also about its recent development. So, Scholarship on Fire, or Sofisαι Sotηρίαν, a brief history of Nazarene Theological College, Manchester. It was the founder of Nazarene Theological College, Dr. George Frame, who is said to have selected the motto, Scholarship on Fire. I can't say I have always warmed to it, if you will excuse the pun, since it always reminded me of the burning of books. However, our founder had a journalistic flair, can I say, and he was trying to express that combination of intellectual and spiritual vitality, which should result from what his generation so often called the baptism of the Holy Ghost and fire. I believe it may have been Dr. Jack Ford, our third principal, I'm not absolutely sure about that, who suggested sofisαι sotirian from 2 Timothy 3:15 as the motto on the college seal, as it was in the middle of the college's life. And once again, the message of this motto is to express the aim of theological education which unites the intellectual and the spiritual, to exemplify scholarly wisdom which is devoted to a soteriological end, the proclamation of salvation in Christ. Both mottos express the conviction that true wisdom is not the wisdom of the secular world, but the wisdom of God, and that this wisdom lies in the preaching of the foolishness of the cross. Charles Wesley famously expressed that as to unite the pair so long disjoined, knowledge and vital piety. So let me talk first of all about the history, the prehistory of the college in the holiness movement. George Sharp was a Scot who emigrated to Upper New York State in 1886, following a young lady he admired and offered a job by her family who owned a steel mill. However, he married Miss Rose, but he went into the Methodist ministry. And both the young couple were influenced by the holiness movement, which was very influential in Upper New York State at that time. And the young minister and his wife were influenced and testified to entire sanctification as a second work of grace. They returned to Scotland in 1900. He became a congregational minister, and in 1906 his church split over his preaching of Christian holiness. With about 80 of the members, he founded Parkhead Pentecostal Church. Crowds flocked to hear the minister who'd been put out of his pulpit. Scenes of revival led to the planting of several daughter churches and the formation of the Pentecostal Church of Scotland in 1909. We need to be clear that the word Pentecostal had been commonly used for several decades by the holiness movement, reflecting the 19th century development by some within Methodism who identified the Pentecostal baptism of the Spirit in Acts 2 as the moment when the apostles, deemed to be already regenerate, received the second blessing, namely entire sanctification. But it was only in the first decade of the 20th century that the claim emerged that the gifts of the Spirit, particularly the gift of tongues, were the necessary initial evidence of this second blessing, identified as the baptism of the Spirit. When Sharp chose the designation Pentecostal in 1906 and 1909, he was not part of that development. He remained part of the holiness movement, which rejected the doctrine of the initial evidence and saw the validity of the phenomenon of glossolalia as a genuine gift of the Spirit. So when the Pentecostal Church of Scotland emerged in 1909, it was one of several other similar groups within the holiness movement. I've listed them there. I don't need to go through them. One that is missing from my list, I think, which should be there, is Thomas Champness, the Joyful News Mission, which led, of course, to the founding or refounding of Cliff College. Sharp founded a college which was the forerunner of this college, the Pentecostal Bible College, which he established in 1912. He returned from the States with the funds to buy a large terrace house in the west end of Glasgow near the university. His star teacher was Olive Winchester. She had graduated from Harvard. She was the first woman to take a BD in the University of Glasgow in 1912, and that same year she was ordained in the Assembly of the Pentecostal Church of Scotland. I argue the first woman to be ordained in the United Kingdom. She later went on to do a doctorate and taught in 2 Nazarene colleges in Nampa, Idaho, and in Pasadena, California. She was notable as a biblical scholar, and I have one of her books here, Crisis Experiences in the Greek New Testament. This was an argument going back to Daniel Steele of Boston University that you could use the aorist tense to prove the necessity of the crisis experience of conversion and of entire sanctification. I have only met one current contemporary Nazarene New Testament scholar who would accept that argument. But that was Dr. Winchester's view on the matter. The Pentecostal Bible College did not last long. The war finished it off. Miss Winchester, as she still was, returned to the States, and Sharp tutored his last student, William Nicholson, until he was called up in conscription, 1916, and came home a few weeks later to die, having been gassed in the trenches. We move on from that early attempt to found a college to 1943, by which time George Frame, a graduate of Glasgow University, was the district superintendent of the British Isles district of the Church of the Nazarene. One of the things Miss Winchester had done was to initiate a correspondence with the Church of the Nazarene in America, as a result of which the Pentecostal Church of Scotland united with the Pentecostal Church of the Nazarene in 1915, the word Pentecostal being dropped in 1919. So George Frame, by 1940, was the district superintendent of the British Isles district of the Church of the Nazarene, and he took the bold decision that the next stage of advance required a college to prepare ministers. And so in 1943, he bought West Hurlet House, which stood in a 20-acre estate in the Renfrewshire countryside between the large town of Paisley with its thread mills and the smaller manufacturing town of Barrhead. The first classes were held in September 1944 with two resident students from the Nazarene Church in Morley in Yorkshire, Arthur Smith and Leslie Newton, and the latter of those is still alive in his 90s, having been a congregational minister for many decades. Tuition was given by the principal, George Frame, and two other university graduates, Arthur Fawcett and James MacLeod. Hugh Ray and Alfred Milliken from the Nazarene Church in the town of Troon joined the student body at the end of the war in 1945. And here are the students. On the left in the front row is T.C. Mitchell, whom I'll mention later, and next to him is Hugh Ray. The minister is the Dean of Students, the Reverend David Anderson. In the first year of the college, George Frame had to face strong opposition from a businessman, Victor Edwards, who happened to be Dr. Sharp's son-in-law. Edwards contended that West Hurlet House was a white elephant undermined by mine workings, and George Frame had to argue the case. West Hurlet House is still standing. The financial position of the college was perilous. It was a considerable venture of faith, or it was very foolhardy to attempt to launch a college in 1944, but the financial strain was lifted in 1948 when the Nazarene Young People's Society, active in churches throughout USA and Canada, as well as in the UK, decided to sponsor Hurlet Nazarene College as their special project and raised $10,000. The devaluation of the pound under Stafford Cripps helped to increase that amount, and so Dr. George Frame was very happy, as you will see on the left there, to receive a cheque for $10,000, which saved the college financially. The living conditions in Hurlet Nazarene College I have described with the phrase stark poverty. The next slide here shows the students working in the college grounds, which our archivist innocently labelled college recreation. The students would have found that hilarious because, in fact, fees were very, very low, but everyone had to work manual labour. Apart from the teaching staff, there was one cook, and everything else was done by the students. And so here they are, out growing their own vegetables, and the cleric supervising them, the Reverend Peter Clark, there, just to make sure they're working hard. The diet was basic. Rationing was still in force. Clothes were threadbare. Living conditions were tough. The hard winters of the late 1940s made it even more difficult. The bedrooms had bare floorboards. The only heating, apart from the kitchen stove, was a coal fire in the lounge. Iron bunks and bedding were brought from the Army surplus store. There were no wardrobes or desks until the 1950s. And even for those straight into post-war days, the Hurlet student had dedicated himself to a life of poverty. not to mention chastity and obedience, of course, but obedience was certainly a large part of it. As in all colleges of that era, students were under strict authority, subject to rules and regulations. The events of the day were marked by a handbell, students wakened at 6:30, ready for domestic duties by 7:30 after morning devotions and ablutions. After breakfast, classes began at 9 o'clock, went to 1 when dinner was served in the Scottish custom, and in the afternoon they were required to engage in manual labour in the house and grounds, and the attempt was made to grow their own food and be self-supporting. It could be described as education in community. Like all Bible colleges of that era, students received simply the college diploma at the end of their studies, and that was recognised for entry to the Nazarene ministry, possibly for service in an independent church or mission agency, but no recognition, of course, from the government. Now, it has to be remembered, this was in an era when only a tiny percentage of the population went to university. Few ministers outside the 2 established churches had university degrees, nor indeed did most lawyers or teachers. In Scotland, however, primary education in the 3 R's was rigorous, and this carried over into solid Bible knowledge given in many Sunday schools. I still grew up in the era when we sat an annual 2-hour written Sunday school exam. It was voluntary, of course, unless your parents happened to be leading lay people, in which case it became obligatory. The ministers who emerged from Hurlet Nazarene College certainly knew their Bibles and had studied from the information-heavy 3 volumes of H. Orton Wiley's newly published Christian Theology. They entered into a living tradition of lively, popular, Bible-based preaching and had many great models in that era, Sangster among the Methodists, James S. Stewart of the Church of Scotland. Their preaching was not only biblically informed, but also spiritually dynamic, closely related to the life of faith in the face of real-life challenges. What they did not meet in their classes, however, were the problems raised by the historical critical method or the challenge of liberal theology. George Frame acquired a valuable member of staff in 1950, J. Kenneth Grider. Oh. Here he is, yes. A graduate of Olivet Nazarene College near Chicago and Nazarene Theological Seminary, Kansas City, and one of my predecessors as Professor of Theology there. He came to pursue doctoral studies at Glasgow University and to teach at Hurlet. They eventually returned to the States in 1952. That same year, the International Holiness Mission, led by a former Nazarene minister, J.B. McLagan, came into union with the Church of the Nazarene. That doubled the number of Nazarene churches in the United Kingdom and also the financial support for the college. George Frame then took the considerable risk of proposing the appointment of a new and very young principal. Hugh Ray, one of the early students who had gone on to Glasgow University, was appointed at the age of 31 as dean for a year, and then in 1952 he became principal at the age of 32. This was to prove an inspired appointment. Hugh Ray had previously been elected by the young people. Here he is as principal in the college photograph of that year. He had previously been elected by the young people of the Church, of the Nazarene Young People Society, as their district president. He had launched NYPS Institute, as it was called, an annual summer conference come holiday with lectures, yes, discussion groups, games, sports held at a number of country houses available for the purpose. This engendered a strong esprit de corps, and Hugh Ray's ready wit made him the centre of any social gathering of this lively group of young people, enlivened by Scots-Irish repartee. The Nazarene rules forbade smoking, alcohol, dancing and cinema, but this was no group of killjoys. My memories as a small child visiting Hurlet are of a vibrancy which avoided all false piousness, but rang with a truly vital piety of a group of young people, the post-war generation, who had made a full consecration to their Saviour and to their church. With Hugh Ray now appointed as principal, the Friday evening lounge meetings at Hurlet College drew a crowd of young people from all the surrounding Nazarene churches, and Hurlet became the centre for a strong fellowship who were deeply committed to the work of the church and had a strong group identity as Nazarenes. But change was in the air. Following the union of the International Holiness Mission with the Church of the Nazarene in 1952, discussions began with the Calvary Holiness Church. This small denomination had broken away from the International Holiness Mission in 1934 under the leadership of a young evangelist, Maynard James, an eloquent, powerful Welsh preacher. He had led a group of fellow students trekking through northern England, putting up their tent to hold missions. Once they established the Calvary Holiness Church, they had some missionary work in South America. The division from the IHM came in 1934 for several reasons, but one was that this younger generation of preachers refused to forbid speaking in tongues, whereas the older laymen who led the IHM were prepared to do so. The Calvary Holiness Church had opened a Bible college in Upper Mill near Oldham in 1947, moving the next year to a larger house in Stalybridge in Cheshire. Maynard James served as principal, but in 1950 he handed that responsibility to his close colleague Jack Ford. Both men had studied at Cliff College, and while serving as a CHC pastor, Ford had demonstrated his ability and his work ethic by graduating as an external student with the University of London BD. The college never had more than about 20 students at its height, and by 1954 the Calvary Holiness Church was in decline and began to open conversations with the Church of the Nazarene. The union came about in 1955. But that posed a difficult question. Which was to be the college for the United British Isles district? The question was referred to the Nazarene Board of General Superintendents, who decreed, with the wisdom of Solomon, that both properties should be sold and a new property purchased. Hugh Ray was very reluctant to leave Hurlet, but Hurlet sold first. So the college moved to Beech Lawn, and when that sold, spent a few months teaching the students in the Nazarene Church in Ashton-under-Lyne. Until the property which was eventually found was the White House in Dean Road, Didsbury. The English vernacular house, set in 5 acres of lawns and woodland, was bought for £9,500. The principal and his family, now 4, with the birth of his son Peter, together with about 20 students, had to be packed into 10 rooms, attics and a garage wing. But work was started on the new residence block for male students, named Hurlet Hall. It cost £18,000 and it was opened in 1961. Here, I hope you can see that, but from left to right is Hugh Ray, Jack Ford, George Frame, Alec Deasley hiding at the back, J.B. McLagan, and the Nazarene General Superintendent G.B. Williamson opening Hurlet Hall. The name British Isles Nazarene College, BINC for short, was adopted to indicate the college's role for the denomination in Britain and Ireland, now divided into 2 districts, British Isles South and British Isles North. The college was now staffed by 3 graduate lecturers, Jack Ford, Hugh Ray, and Alec Deasley. Deasley, the son of a Nazarene pastor from Dundee who moved to Birmingham, was a student at Hurlet and then went on to Cambridge, where he took a BA in specialising in New Testament studies. These were the years of what was known as the 3 wise men at BINC. It saw the college reach heights in the quality of theological education it offered. But that was not, I think, at the cost of the fire seen in the commitment to endure hardship and to preach in the power of the Spirit. The evangelistic drive of the trekkers continued in a new generation involved in evangelism. Theologically, the college, like the holiness tradition as a whole, stood within conservative evangelicalism. The years of the three wise men did not last long, however. The strain of running the institution on a shoestring was considerable, and when the Nazarene Department of Home Missions, based at Nazarene headquarters in Kansas City, decided without consultation to invest in a new college on the Swiss-German border where tuition would be in English, Hugh Ray resigned. Jack Ford succeeded him as principal from 1966 to 1973. He was just completing his doctoral thesis at the University of London, although supervised by Gordon Rupp here in Manchester. It was a painstaking study of the three groups who had come together to form the Church of the Nazarene in Britain, and his thesis was published by the Nazarene Publishing House in 1968, entitled In the Steps of John Wesley. Jack Ford's 7 years as principal were not easy. Alec Deasley resigned to find time to complete his doctoral thesis at Manchester under the direction of F.F. Bruce, and was then invited to teach at Canadian Nazarene College in Winnipeg, Manitoba. T. Crichton Mitchell was invited to join the academic staff. Tom Mitchell had been a pastor of several Nazarene churches, and he taught for some years at the European Nazarene Bible College on the Swiss-German border at Schaffhausen. Mitchell was a self-taught but erudite scholar and bibliophile. Dr. Ford also brought Bill Rowland, a Scot who had gone on from Bink to take his BD degree at the Nazarene Seminary in Kansas City, and with his wife, the musician Lois Rowland, they brought a new vibrancy to the college, and along with a group of students he recruited from the USA, they took the students on a tour of the churches performing the musical Life in halls and theatres. There were two reasons why life was not easy for the principal. First, he was a scholar and pastor, but not at home in administration, and he still had to cope with this serious financial stringency. Secondly, there was the appearance in the late 60s of the student revolution. All over the Western world, students of the swinging 60s were influenced by the new pop culture and the mores of the permissive society, and were reacting against old-fashioned rules and regulations. Jack Ford was a distinctly old-fashioned Yorkshire gentleman, the product of a holiness movement which had strict codes of dress, self-discipline, and rejected worldly ways. Now, the mood of the time was only mildly represented at Bink, a restlessness at the traditional, rather authoritarian regime. But nonetheless, the principal's gracious and kindly patience was tested. And by 1971, he had indicated that he was ready to retire as soon as a successor was found. One of Dr. Frame's last actions as he retired as chairman of the board was to sound out Hugh Ray about his willingness to return. The years away from Bink teaching at Canadian Nazarene College had given him a fresh perspective, but he was clear that he would not return unless there was a sound financial basis for the college. Dr. Ed Mann, the executive secretary of the Department of Education in the denomination, was happy to make arrangements for a more substantial annual grant. And so, despite the happy and settled situation for their family in Winnipeg, Hugh and Nan Ray agreed to come back to Bink. But few understood how difficult the first 2 years were for the returning principal and his family. Part of the new direction which he planned for the college was to aim to take advantage of a new opportunity to prepare students for a British degree. That was a long-term goal. As a first step, he arranged for Bink to affiliate with Canadian Nazarene College and prepare students for their Bachelor of Theology degree. Dr. Harvey J.S. Blaney, a recently retired professor of New Testament at Eastern Nazarene College in Quincy, Massachusetts, agreed to come as academic dean. The son of an Alberta farmer, Kent Brower, who had completed an MA at Eastern Nazarene College, expressed an interest in coming to teach so that he could also pursue PhD research under Manchester's Rylands Professor of Biblical Criticism, F.F. Bruce. Norma Wilson, a former student who'd taken the BD degree at Nazarene Theological Seminary, Kansas City, returned as librarian and lecturer, putting the library on a professional basis and beginning the college archives. Hugh Ray also intended to move away from the old ethos of British Bible colleges, where students worked manually around the college to keep fees low, and to adopt the arrangement common elsewhere by which some students were employed and paid for their services. Also, members of staff would no longer live in the college as an extended family, but where possible would buy their own homes. To ensure that the Nazarene churches in Britain supported the new direction, Hugh Ray visited groups of churches accompanied by Ed Mann to explain the new developments. He also proposed setting up a commission of ministers and laity to think creatively about the whole role of the college in relation to ministry. As the secretary of that Evans Commission, I was commissioned to write the report and was able to propose some educational developments, including my proposal to set up a selection panel for the ministry for the first time. Nazarene pastors could enter the ministry without attending college, and this was an attempt to control that and to make sure that all had at least 1 year of college education. In 1976, after T.C. Mitchell had accepted an appointment to the Nazarene Bible College in Colorado Springs and Harvey Blaine had retired back to the USA, Hugh Ray appointed Herbert McGonigal, minister of a Nazarene church in Leeds, to the academic staff to teach church history and Old Testament. Like Jack Ford, he had completed the rigorous London external BD. As a young teacher who had just completed a BD at New College, Edinburgh, I was appointed to teach systematic theology and to serve as academic dean in succession to Dr. Blaney. Dr. Ford had launched an appeal for funds to build a chapel in memory of J.B. McLagan. Dr. Ray reinvigorated that appeal, and in 1978 the new McLagan Chapel was opened by Mrs. McLagan. Dr. Ed Mann, who had arranged a grant from the denomination's Department of Home Missions, preached the dedicatory sermon. Dr. T.W. Schofield and the Reverend David Tarrant, two district superintendents, served as chair of the Board of Governors elected by the two districts' assembly. A new dining room and kitchen had been built along with the McLagan Chapel, and the college staff always had a full-time cook, since resident students received full board with cooked meals, thus keeping the sense of family community. There were changes in staff, however. The Rowlands left the United States. Kent Brower returned to teach at Canadian Nazarene College, and various short-term lecturers came in to fill the gap. In 1994, the college group are seen here at graduation in the year of the college's 40th anniversary. Dr. Ray also added to the college's assets by buying property in the area to house the increasing number of non-resident married students with families. This was financed by taking mortgages. The mortgage payments were financed by the rents, and the students gained the rent allowances from the local authority. A simple but effective scheme worthy of the true entrepreneur. Dr. Ray had spotted an opportunity which was entirely legal, but for some reason, when the local authority realised what was happening, a new rule was introduced denying rent allowances to students, where the landlord was the college. But this built up the college's assets, and when those properties were eventually sold, they financed necessary development of the campus. That was a very significant financial move for the development of the college. A little about the theological stance. In 1979, the year after the chapel was opened, the college launched the Didsbury Lectures. Professor F.F. Bruce, Kent Brower's PhD supervisor, was the mentor who suggested a series of 4 lectures each year, giving material for a short book He gave the first lectures in 1979 on men and movements in the primitive church. And with his backing, the series was published by Paternoster Press. James Atkinson of Sheffield, Howard Marshall of Aberdeen, T.F. Torrance of Edinburgh, C.K. Barrett of Durham followed in quick succession. 6 of the first 10 lectures stood in the Wesleyan tradition, and all could be regarded as evangelical, understanding that word, of course, in a British, not in an American context. The 1970s also saw particular developments within Wesleyan theology. The mid-20th century had seen the rediscovery of Wesley as not only a great evangelist and churchman, but as a theologian. Albert Outler, of course, was the significant name here. But the rediscovery of Wesley also led to the discovery that the identification of entire sanctification with the Pentecostal baptism of the Spirit, the standard teaching of the 19th century holiness movement, was not Wesley's teaching. This therefore came under scrutiny. 3 years before he became a lecturer at Bink, Herbert McGonigal had ignited a lively debate within the Wesleyan Theological Society, and particularly within the Church of the Nazarene, with an article making this point, published in the Wesleyan Theological Journal in 1973. Pneumatological Nomenclature in Early Methodism was the delightful title. According to the Nazarene historian Mark Quanstrom, this led to a deep division within the Church of the Nazarene between a classic Wesleyan position and that of the 19th century holiness movement. The classic Wesleyan position was to become increasingly dominant view among Nazarene professors and lecturers. The main thrust of Dr. Ray's new approach was the development of a British degree. The Canadian THB was a very significant development for several years. Half a dozen students were prepared for the external London BD. But by 1986-78, by the mid-80s, there was a sufficiently solid group of teachers and academics to consider the approach to the Council for National Academic Awards. Having been Dean for 12 years, I proposed the return of Kent Brower to work through this development. Peter Ray also returned at that point as registrar. Donald Guthrie of LBC came to give the Didsbury Lectures in 85, and since LBC was the first theological college to be approved by CNAA, that was a helpful link. Peter Cotterill, who served on CNAA committees, came to visit the college and recommended that we buy the house next door, Dean House. CNAA, of course, is the Council for National Academic Awards, which was set up by the government to allow the polytechnics to grant degrees. The college was approved after a considerable amount of work through 1989, approved at the beginning of 1990, and at the same point the Board of Governors voted to change the college's name from British Isles Nazarene College to Nazarene Theological College, Manchester. But no sooner was that approved than the government issued a white paper proposing the abolition of the CNAA. And so the single subject colleges, including theological colleges, had to find a university to associate with. And so for us, the obvious choice was the University of Manchester. In 1992, the agreement was signed, and the first Manchester graduates graduated shortly afterwards. Since the college now was preparing students for a Manchester degree, this significantly affected our recruitment. The Biblical Studies lecturer Gordon Thomas, through ECMA, the Evangelical Council for the Manchester area, undertook a programme of visiting churches in the Manchester area to present the possibilities to those who might be interested in theologication. That led to a significant increase in enrolment. In 93-94, the total number of students was 80, that's including full and part-time. By 1997 to 98, it had risen to 193. By 2005-6, it was 275, and the most recent figures we have for this last year, a total of 331 students. This also opened the door, of course, for the preparation of research degrees, and the first doctorates were completed in 1999. The fact that the Methodist archives had been placed at the John Rylands was, of course, a tremendous strategic advantage. And so, in 2003, Dr. McGonigal established the Manchester Wesley Research Centre. Jordan Hammond succeeded him as director of that in 2010. Myself, Dwight Swanson, David Rainey were among the others who were available to supervise PhD studies. The college had fraternal arrangements with, and I'm forgetting about my, I should have said, of course, that by the time those developments took place, the fourth principal was Herbert McGonigal, who reaped the fruits of the new policy which Hugh Ray had put in place. The college had fraternal relations with another of the old Bible colleges, Emmanuel Bible College in Birkenhead, founded by J.D. Drysdale in the Holiness tradition. That, however, did not succeed in becoming a successful degree-granting college, and so in 1997 it decided to unite with NTC, and the finance from the sale of that property helped to build this building, named the Emmanuel Centre. From that time too, the college here launched the annual Drysdale Lectures, and among those who have given that are Martin Goldsmith, Tony Campolo, Christopher J.H. Wright of the Langham Project, and Andrew Walls. Dr. McGonigal was succeeded by Dr. David McCulloch, and then by our first woman principal, Dr. Deirdre Brower-Latz. Lots of work has taken place in the renovation of the property, and the college did help for a number of years to keep the Scottish School of Mission Studies going. But since time is running away from me, I think, without going into those details, I will just go into the conclusion. Dr. Brower-Latz was installed as the sixth principal in 2012, and the growth of the college has enabled her to develop that role. Previously, in a small college, the principal had to be hands-on on everything. But now, a much more extensive administrative staff keeps the institution running, and this is no mean task, given the greatly increased demands of university and government to ensure that the institution is stable and serving the needs of its students. And the college is indebted to a group of highly professional administrators. This releases the principal from day-to-day matters, allows her to oversee operations, coordinate different departments, preside at open staff consultations, cast the vision for the future, and network, building up relationships not only across the Nazarene denomination and churches, but other churches and Christian agencies throughout the country. There are currently 13 academic staff serving as members of the faculty, 2 others who are simply supervising research. Whereas 33 years ago, when Hugh Ray retired, these were exclusively British, there are now 6 other nationalities represented. The student body is similarly diverse. 2018, the college reported a student body of 106 full-time students, 208 part-time students, representing 30 nationalities. The primary role for which the college was founded was to provide both theological education and spiritual formation for those entering the Nazarene pastoral ministry. That is now complemented by providing the same all-round preparation, theological, practical and spiritual, for Christian mission and ministry in many different fields of service, not only in pastoral ministry, and in many different countries. In addition to that, the college has a unique role within the International Church of the Nazarene, which has 56 colleges around the world, in being the first of those to graduate students with a PhD. And the presence of the Methodist archives, the John Rylands, and the work of the Manchester Wesley Research Centre gives it a unique role. But it is not only at the level of pure scholarship, but also in the wider task of preparation for Christian ministry. In the 2018 National Student Survey, this college scored 100% for student satisfaction. It should be expected that theological students in a confessional Christian college would be of good moral character and shaped by Christian fellowship to cooperate gladly with each other and with their teacher. But colleges are no longer the ivory towers they may once have been. Many students in today's society, with its multiple moral problems of family breakdown, abuse, drug addiction, depression, poor mental health, migration, eating disorders, extreme disability, and much more, suffer the scars and wrestle with serious personal issues. The pastoral groups which meet for prayer, the service of counsellors and the chaplaincy, the uplifting worship and the challenging preaching in the college chapel, and the supportive fellowship all combine to ensure that NTC Manchester provides not only thought-provoking and challenging intellectual formation, but also the spiritual formation in a truly redemptive Christian community. As strongly as 75 years ago, perhaps even more so, given the decline of Christian influence and Christian discipline in society at large, the college is concerned not just with rigorous scholarship and honest thinking, but with scholarship that is on fire with the cleansing, empowering fire of the Holy Spirit. It aims to provide a theological education which is intellectually challenging, but which is not merely the communication of information. It is not merely a sheltered, bookish intellectual retreat, but aims rather to inculcate that true wisdom, that wisdom which comes from above, and which is, above everything else, redemptive wisdom, in line with the vision of its founder, characterizing those who are sofisαι, sotηρίαν, wise unto salvation.
I think we have just a few minutes for questions. We'll eat slightly into our coffee time. No, I know that was a strategy, but you haven't quite managed. I'll see you.
You mentioned that at Hurlit, in the early days, the daily discipline was quite rigorous.
Yes.
Almost monastic, it struck me.
Yes.
Anything of that survived in the ethos of the college today?
Does that survive in the college today?
The rigour of daily discipline.
Not in that form, I would. You understand, my only involvement here is to sit in my study and read and write, so I'm not perhaps the best one to speak on that. I think it is certainly true. I mean, I remember when I was dean, the whole issue was switching over from this externally imposed discipline, which was the traditional way of doing it, to encouraging the students to develop self-discipline. I remember one fellow who grew up in a Nazarene home where there was no television, who couldn't keep away from the television in the common room. And eventually we abolished the television in the common room. So there were challenges, but I think I could say the move was from discipline externally opposed to self-discipline, but within community. I think the pastoral prayer groups are very important in that respect.
There's also the morning prayer and the work day, aren't there?
Yes.
Which sort of, I think, have a link to those.
Indeed, that's very true. Yes.
Yeah, it's intriguing you mentioned. So when the college was, I suppose, forced to affiliate with the University of Manchester, I was just wondering if that affected the way in which candidates were prepared for ministry in any way.
Well, under the system, the college prepares its own curriculum, its own syllabuses, entirely independent and separate from the university. Those are approved by the university. They are carefully inspected for standards. And of course, there are external examiners, as with all British degrees. So the role of the university is to ensure that the student is getting what he's paying for, or what she's paying for. But it doesn't in any way, interfere is not the right word, but it is not involved in the actual construction of the curriculum, the content.
Actually, can I make
Yes,
a
yes.
comment?
Well, yes, the dean will answer that better than I will.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think I would say that the college has embraced rather than resisted those partnerships. So I think what you said about Emmanuel, I was thinking about, and it wasn't just that they couldn't get, that actually they decided they didn't want to move in that direction. They wanted to be independent and not to be under the kind of eye of regulatory bodies. Actually, the college, the kind of sense of scholarship is an important part, and as an open part, I think has been one of the things that we've celebrated. So I feel like that process has been one that we've actually initiated and have welcomed. I think that's true to say.
And just to add to this,
Dr. Brown, yes, yes.
the confessional nature of our college versus the secular nature of the university caused us to sit down together with the dean and the former dean, worked out a policy of the university that made this work, and we can retain our confessional identity within the context of this avowedly non-confessional university. I mean, it's explicitly non-confessional.
Yes, and so sometimes we will send students to the university because we feel like actually they don't fit easily in a confessional environment. So actually you should look in this direction, and the other happens. So actually you need a place where you're worshipping in a group. That's what you're looking for. Go down that direction. I see a question.
Yeah, I could
sorry.
add another point. But I think the affiliation with the University of Manchester, both as positive, is also part of importance for this subject matter today, in that we did see this because the abolition of the CNAA opened up funding to students in private colleges such as this, that it actually did compel other Bible colleges and Bible schools to jump on the bandwagon or die. And perhaps many of those were not ready or positive in the same way. So the fact that we already had a good relationship with the University Department of Theology, University of Theology, and so on, meant it had a long process before it happened. I think that's, but that whole process of what happened when anti-establishment Bible colleges became establishment theological colleges, what happened next?
That's an interesting piece.
One more?
I was just going to make the point that presumably as big, if not bigger, change was the switch from a London BD to CNAA, because as I understand it, the London BD was kind of simply a reading list.
Yes.
And the students went off to be examined,
Yes.
whereas the CNAA required you to design the course from top to bottom.
That's
So
correct. That's
that must
correct.
have been a huge...
Oh yes, enormous. Putting students in for the London BD and preparing them, devising courses to teach them and take them through, was a practice run.
Yeah.
And it simply proved to ourselves that we were working at that level, at British degree level, and probably always had been, at least since BINC was established with the 3 graduate lectures there. Yes.
I think we're probably overstaying our coffee time. I have a feeling this conversation will continue through coffee, but we'll adjourn.